Week 14 of the fantasy football season. His wide receiver starts it every matchup this week. First one Thursday night, NFC North matchup, Green Bay Packers at the Lions. Jaden Reed's a start. I know previous weeks he wasn't doing much with Jaden Reed, but last week got back on track, found the end zone twice. He's number one option in this passing game for this Green Bay Packer team, and he's one of the best yard after catch wide receivers in the league as well. So this week in a potential high-scoring game with Thursday night football, and both these teams have high-powered offenses, he's a start. Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson as sits. Week in and week out, it's just tough to forecast what these wide receivers are going to do for this Green Bay Packer team. 1 week it's a good week, 1 week it's a bad week, and if you don't need to play that carousel of which week one of these receivers are going to have a good game, I would sit them both because you just don't know week in and week out what you're going to get. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams as starts. I know St. Brown last week, it was a down game for him where the offense ran through Sam Laporta for the most part in the passing game where he found the end zone twice. But St. Brown, I think he's going to bounce back. This is a big ball game. And this line offense is a well-oiled machine where I know last week they did stall out a lot in the red zone, where this week they know they got to punch those field goals into touchdowns. And St. Brown to start. Jameson Williams, he had a mediocre game last week as well. But it just takes one deep ball for him to have the big day as Jameson Williams. So he's the number 2, number 3 option in this offense for this Detroit Lion team. And I think this week where they got to have more urgency to put points on the board, Jameson Williams will come out with a good ball game. Atlanta Falcons at the Minnesota Vikings. Drake London, Darnell Mooney's as starts for me. Drake London, it's been a solid first season with Kirk Cousins at quarterback for this Atlanta Falcon team. And last week he was his go-to guy down the stretch. And obviously he would be in that ball game in a tough loss versus the Los Angeles Chargers. But this week we know Kirk Cousins, he wants to stick it to his old team. Done from him. I think this week it's going to be a potential high-scoring game at Minnesota. So Drake London to start, Darnell Mooney to start. It was definitely a down game for Darnell Mooney, but at times he's going to have off games. But this week in Minnesota, I think he's going to go out there. I think he's going to put up points. Him and Kirk Cousins all season long have had a good rapport. He's a good deep ball threat and yard after catch threat as well. So he's a start. Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison starts. Jefferson, one of his best games in the last few weeks. He had 7 catches, 99 yards in that ball game. So Justin Jefferson, I think he can take advantage of the secondary where they can't stop anyone. We saw last week Lab McConkey have over 100 yards in the first half. So I think Jefferson has a big game. Jordan Addison, the last 2 weeks, he's starting to get into the offense. A few weeks ago, a big fantasy game, 162 yards and a touchdown. And then last week, he had 9.40 fantasy points in PPR league. So Addison's starting to get more involved. And this week, I think he has a good ball game. New Orleans Saints at the New York Giants. Marquez Valdez-Scantling, he's a flex option. He's pretty much been a deep ball touchdown or nothing for this New Orleans Saints team. So this week at a weak Giants secondary, I think once again it wouldn't be far-fetched. He goes out there and has a deep ball touchdown is Valdez-Scantling. I'll put him as a flex option. Cedric Wilson a sit. This offense, I know Taysom Hill out for the season with the knee injury, but still no one's really stepped up. And it's pretty much been Alvin Kamara and VS over the last few weeks. So Cedric Wilson, we have to see more out of him, even in a good matchup. He's a sit. Malik Neighbors a start each and every week. He's getting anywhere from 12, 15 fantasy points in PPR leagues. I know the numbers went down drastically since the first 4 weeks of the season here for Malik Neighbors. But with Drew Lock in there, quarterback, if he's going to start once again, he was targeting Neighbors early and often. It was good to see him get off to a good start instead of second half getting all his fantasy points last week. But like I said, the ceiling isn't just as high as it was for Malik Neighbors, but he definitely is due for a big game as well. And he's a start this week. Wan'Dale Robinson a sit. This offense is definitely going to support a lot of guys for fantasy football. Is this New York Giant offense pretty much Tracy and Malik Neighbors the only option. So this week I know Rondell got off to a good start early in the year. He's a sit. Jacksonville Jaguars at the Titans, 2 of the worst teams arguably in all pro football. Brian Thomas Jr. start. Last week he got off to a slow start but finished with a big ball game, including a 50-yard play. He made Brian Robinson taking a slant and going down the sidelines, almost taking it to the house. So Thomas, number 1 option in this passing game. Then I think Evan Ingram. And even with Mac Jones most likely in there, quarterback, he's a start. Parker Washington a sit in this ball game. Parker Washington, he had 103 yards and a touchdown last week. I know him and Mac Jones definitely have a good rapport playing with the second team all season long. But we have to see more out of Washington, putting him in the lineup a sit. Calvin Ridley a start. I know his numbers haven't been off the charts over the last few weeks, but he's the number 1 option in the passing game. Will Levis, he's definitely improved over the last few weeks in terms of not turning the football over and at least getting into his wideouts. I know it's been a lot of garbage time, a lot of games they've been blown out, but I believe this week this is a close contested game between these division rivals. He's a start. Westbrook Akeen, what a season it's been for him. He's been a touchdown and nothing. He has 18 receptions on the season, is Westbrook-Ikhine, and on the year he's got 8 touchdowns. He's going out there. He's got the nose for the end zone. He's the deep ball threat, and him and Will Levis definitely locked in. Vegas Raiders at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Jacoby Myers, he's been moving up the ranks over the last few weeks, and number 2 option in this passing game. And this Raider team, they gave the Chiefs a run for their money, and obviously a questionable call at the end of that ball game ended it for them. But Myers, he's going out there weekly. He's getting 80, 90-yard range receiving the football. And this week at Tampa Bay, a secondary that can't stop anyone. He's a start. Trey Tucker, Sid, I know last week had a nice 58-yard touchdown, but besides that, he didn't do much. And pretty much the weekly fantasy options are Brock Bowers and Myers in this lineup. Mike Evans a start each and every week. Last week, big ball game for Mike Evans, finding the end zone, big catches down the stretch to win in overtime at Carolina. And this week versus Raiders secondary, that obviously can't stop anyone, a must start. Jalen McMillan, Sterling Shepard not doing much in this passing game. And pretty much this offense now is Mike Evans, Bucky Irvin, and Rashad White doing all the heavy lifting for this Tampa Bay Buck team. So McMillan and Shepard, like I said, they obviously get opportunities, but not viable fantasy options. Cleveland Browns at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Jerry Jeudy a must start, and what a tear he's been on, Jerry Jeudy, ever since Jameis Winston got into the starting lineup. So last week versus one of the best defenses in the league, we saw Jerry Jeudy go out there and torch his former team. 13 catches, 235 yards, a touchdown, and a 2-point conversion. So Jameis and Jerry Jeudy, they're locked in. Even early in that ball game, they missed on what would have been an 80, 85-yard touchdown. So Jeudy, he found a new home, got the contract extension in the offseason, and he's finally playing up to potential where obviously he was a bust as an early first-rounder with the Denver Broncos years ago. So Jeudy this week, even in a tough matchup at the Pittsburgh Steelers, there's no way you could sit him on your bench. He's a start even in the tough matchup. Cedric Tillman, he's been out with a concussion. He's a sit in this ball game. Even if he comes back, we know Jerry Jeudy's the number 1 wide receiver. And Tillman, a lot of his points came in garbage time the weeks he put up fantasy points. So this week, if he's back, like I said, he's going to be a sit. The 2 top targets in this offense are Jerry Jeudy and David Njoku. Elijah Moore, he's a sit as well. I thought he had a decent ball game last week at the Denver Broncos, but inconsistencies have been there all season long. 1 good game, 1 bad game type of thing. And even with 6 teams on bye and Tillman does return, I think more snaps are going to go down a little bit, and the numbers are going to go down. Now for the Steelers, George Pickens, he's a start. Him and Russell Wilson, they're locked in. They're making big plays, and he's putting up fantasy points. And this week here, it's a good matchup versus Cleveland Browns secondary that can't stop anyone. Courtland Sutton, once again, went over 100 yards. Pickens, number 1 option in this offense, obviously, in the passing game. With Pat Freiermuth, I believe, number 2. But Pickens, this week, I believe, puts up good numbers. Calvin Austin, the sit. I know he's turning into more of a deep ball threat, which obviously Russell Wilson likes hearing that football out, getting it down the football field. And Calvin Austin, he's an explosive type of wide receiver with track star speed, no doubt about it. But inconsistencies have been there as well. If he's not making a big yard after catch play or burning a secondary for a touchdown, the numbers really haven't been there. And this week he's a sit. Carolina Panthers at the Philadelphia Eagles. And Theo, he had a big game last week, no doubt about it, but he's still a sit option for me. This Panther offense is going to have trouble, I believe, in this ball game versus one of the best defenses in the league that bottled up a high-powered Baltimore offense for the most part during that ball game last week. So Thielen, no doubt about it, I think he's the number 1 option in the passing game. He's a sit. Xavier Legette, he's had some decent ball games this season, Legette, but nothing where you're going to put him in the lineup, even with 6 teams on bye. I don't really see Legette as a good option this week. A.J. Brown start each and every week. I know last week actually was a down game for once for A.J. Brown, only 11.60 fantasy points in PPR leagues, but him and Jalen Hurts are locked in. They're making plays weekly. It seems like he finds the end zone weekly. He's a must-start versus a bad secondary. Devonta Smith, he was out the last few games with a hamstring injury, but he got on the field and warmed up in last week's game, but couldn't give it a go. But this week, I think he returns. Great matchup. I know Devonta Smith, he's been a boom or bust wide out all season long, where his numbers have definitely dropped off, but this week in a good matchup, I will put him in the starting lineup. New York Jets at the Dolphins. Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, 2 good receivers, no doubt about it. But also they're going to have the inconsistencies as well as Wilson and Adams. But this week in a matchup in a potential high-scoring ball game at the Miami Dolphins, both these wide receivers I think could take advantage of that secondary. I know they got Jalen Ramsey, but also I think Jalen Ramsey, he's not as elite as a corner as he once was. So I think they could go out there this week is Garrett Wilson and Adams in possibly a high-scoring ball game in their starts. Tyreek Hill, he's locked in weekly as a start. Last week he had a good ball game, found the end zone. I know his numbers have definitely gone down this season. He's not 100% dealing with a back and obviously a wrist ligament injury. But Tyreek Hill has a great track record versus New York Jets secondary. And him and Tua, they're locked in, obviously, going back to last season. So I think this week, Tyreek Hill, he goes out there, he has a good game. And Waddle, he's only had one big game all season long, and that was a couple weeks ago in that victory for the Miami Dolphins versus New England Patriots. But this week, I think Jalen Waddle, he's a flex option at best. He hasn't really found the end zone this season. He's only getting 4 or 5 catches per game max for fantasy owners. I know it's a decent matchup versus Jet defense that can't stop anyone, but still, I can't trust Waddle week in and week out to be 100% a start. Seattle Seahawks at the Arizona Cardinals. DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith-Njigba, both starts. I know Metcalf, the numbers have dropped off over the last couple of weeks. We also know he's not 100%, where he possibly could have been out for the season with that leg injury is Metcalf, but he's a tough player. And the Seahawks team now have won 3 in a row as well. So DK Metcalf, I know a couple weeks ago he didn't do much versus secondary, but I believe this week he could go out there and have a bounce-back game. JSN, the last 4 or 5 weeks, he's gone out there, he's putting up numbers. He's been operating in terms of numbers as the number 1 wide receiver for the Seattle Seahawks team. And this week in a matchup at a secondary of the Cardinals, where he had a good ball game a couple weeks ago, was JSN. I think he's a start. Once again, Tyler Lockett is taking a back seat in this offense, and rightfully so. He's up there in age now as Tyler Lockett. His best seasons are behind him. He's still a decent number 3 wide receiver, but not really a guy who's going to be in your starting lineup where the numbers have definitely fallen off. Marvin Harrison to start. I know his numbers have been up and down all season, but he still has 7 touchdowns in his rookie season. Last week, a nice touchdown in the back of the end zone on pretty much on a diving grab versus the Minnesota Vikings. So Marvin Harrison, he is a number 1 in my opinion. I know at times Kyler Murray, he's inaccurate. He's not obviously getting the targets to Harrison. But this week in a matchup versus Seattle, where obviously he didn't do much a couple weeks ago in their matchup, I think he bounces back and they try to get him the football early and often. Michael Wilson is hit. I know he's number 2 wide receiver on this Cardinal team, but we really haven't seen much out of Michael Wilson this season besides a couple flash games here and there. He's a sit. Buffalo Bills at the Los Angeles Rams. Khalil Shakir, I've said this week in and week out, number 1 option in the passing game for Josh Allen. Josh Allen putting up MVP numbers once again this season. Shakir, great, obviously possession receiver, could run all the routes. I know last week was a snowstorm in that game. It was tough to move the football down the field, but Shakir, still a player that's going to go out there. He's still going to put up points. And this week in a good matchup at a Ram defense that I don't think's that good, he's a start. Amari Cooper, a flex option at best. He's pretty much been non-existent, unfortunately, since he got traded to the Buffalo Bills. But the one thing Amari Cooper is doing, he's bringing leadership to the receiver room, I believe. And also, he's opening it up for other guys to get open and make plays. Because Amari Cooper, even though I think his best days are behind him, he still could run the routes. He still has a good IQ of getting open as Amari Cooper, but just it hasn't been there this season, so he's a flex option. Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, they start each and every week. I know Cooper Kupp, he had a down game last week where Puka Nacua had the nice touchdown and a nice game for the Los Angeles Rams, but one down week, Kupp bounces back, and in a ball game where they need to put points on the board, he's a start. Chicago Bears at the San Francisco 49ers. Matt Eberflus, he finally got fired from the Bears with the poor clock management. In the game, at minimum, they could have forced overtime last week at the Lions. So this week, DJ Moore start. Last week, 97 yards, found the end zone. Him and Caleb Williams the last 2 weeks have been back on track together. And DJ Moore, we know he's a good receiver. Last season, he put up monster numbers with Fields. And this week in a matchup at San Francisco, where their secondary really hasn't been good this season, he's a start. Keenan Allen, the last couple weeks, his numbers have gone up. Last week, he found the end zone twice. Keenan Allen starting to get things going. And now with a new coaching staff, this offense, I think, could shake up a little bit as well. And even pass the football more, I believe, is a spare team. So this week in a matchup where they know they got to put points on the board versus San Francisco, Keenan Allen, a flex option. Rome Odunze, he was a high draft pick this season, but the numbers really haven't been there. And when you're the 4th or 5th option in an offense, it's obviously tough. DeAndre Swift, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Cole Kmet, and Rome Odunze's pretty much been the odd man out. He's a sit. Deebo Samuel, Jawan Jennings, they're flex options. Deebo Samuel, it just hasn't been there this season, and maybe his best years are behind him as well, is Deebo Samuel. The last few weeks, his numbers have been non-existent. Him and Brock Purdy, not on the same page. I know last week was a snowstorm and it's tough to move the football and make plays. But even before that, Deebo Samuel, he was going second, third round in most fantasy drafts, and he just hasn't put up numbers all year long. Jawan Jennings, he's been a solid option, and I said this in other videos, he's been better than Brandon Ayuk was before Ayuk went down with the torn ACL. So even in the snowstorm, he had 56 yards receiving in that ball game. So Jennings and Deebo, not much upside in my opinion. Kittle type of game. So they're both flex options. Los Angeles Chargers at the Kansas City Chiefs. So Ladd McConkey got hurt last week, and we'll see if he plays in this ball game with the Kansas City Chiefs. So if he plays, he's a must start. Is Ladd McConkey number one option in the passing game? And the last month of the season, his numbers have definitely gone up. And last week, he had over 100 yards in the first half. So Ladd McConkey, talented wide receiver, like a mini Cooper Kupp. He could run the routes. He has good hands, and he got good yard after catch ability. And this week, if he does play, they're going to need a lot out of him, I believe, if they want to pull off the upset in this ball game at Kansas City. Quentin Johnson, Joshua Palmer, even if McConkey's out, they're not viable options for me. Quentin Johnson, he's had drop problems last season. He's had the drop problems this season. I know the numbers have been a little bit better with Quentin Johnson, where he's found the end zone a decent amount. But besides that, he's pretty much a boom or bust wide receiver. In the last 3 weeks, he's been a bust. Is Quentin Johnson, he's a sit. Joshua Palmer, I think he's more suited as a number 3 wide receiver. We've definitely seen some flashes out of him last season, and even a couple years ago when Keenan Allen and Mike Williams were banged up at times for this Los Angeles Charger team. But Joshua Palmer, pretty much all season long, has been inconsistent, and he's definitely a good talent, but he just hasn't put it all together. And this week in a tough matchup, especially in a playoff type atmosphere for fantasy owners, where a lot of people have to win to get in, he's tough to trust. He's a sit. Now to the Chiefs, DeAndre Hopkins a start. I believe he's acclimated pretty well with his new team, and him and Mahomes are building on the rapport weekly. DeAndre Hopkins, he's at least found the end zone a couple times in the last month since he got traded here to this Kansas City Chiefs team. And this week in a decent matchup versus the Chargers, where their secondary I don't think is all that great. I think Hopkins could go out there and be a viable starting option. Xavier Worthy is sit for me in this ball game. Xavier Worthy, I think they got to find ways to put him in space where he could use that track speed, but obviously that hasn't been the case. I know he's had a couple decent games over the last few weeks, but he's pretty much capped out. And the final game of the week, Monday Night Football, Cincinnati Bengals at the Dallas Cowboys. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins starts. Jamar Chase, what a season it's been for him. Over 1,100 yards, 13 touchdowns. I know it hasn't resulted in many victories for the Cincinnati Bengal team, but Jamar Chase, he's having a great season. Number 1 wide receiver in all of fantasy football. And this week, I think, versus a bad Cowboys secondary, he goes out there, has a huge performance, and possibly the top scorer this week. T. Higgins a start. Anytime he's been in the lineup this season, for the most part, T. Higgins, he's putting up numbers. But obviously, injuries have been turned throughout the last couple seasons here for T. Higgins. This year, we know he's on the 1-year franchise tag. I don't know if he's going to return. But this week, in a good matchup at the Dallas Cowboys on Monday Night Football, I think T. Higgins could go out there and have a nice performance for fantasy owners in the Cincinnati Bengal team. And him and Chase arguably are the best 1-2 combo on the same team at the receiver position. Now to the Cowboys, CeeDee Lamb, I know he's not 100%. I know he's banged up with the shoulder injury and other elements of CeeDee Lamb, but he's a gamer and he's been fighting through to play these ball games. I know last week, non-existent ball game it was for him in a good matchup versus the New York Giants, but Lamb the number 1 option in this Cowboy offense. Cooper Rush, he's targeting CeeDee Lamb a whole lot since he's become the starting quarterback since Dak Prescott went down with an injury. And this week, CeeDee Lamb, I believe he'll play, and he's a player you put in the starting lineup. Brandon Cooks, Jalen Tolbert to sit. I know Cooks found the end zone last week, but him and Cooper Rush, the rapport really wasn't there until that 1 touchdown. And Brandon Cooks, I think his best years are behind him. He's been dealing with injuries on and off over the last couple seasons with this Dallas Cowboy team. And even in a matchup versus Cincinnati Bengal defense that can't stop anyone this season, it's tough to trust Cook even in this spot, unless obviously CeeDee Lamb was out. That's the only way I would trust Cook. And Jalen Tolbert, he's been a decent number 3 and 2 receiver at times for this Dallas Cowboy team. But with Cooper Rush at quarterback, pretty much the only guys you would have confidence in, obviously, going out there week in and week out is CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson, or Schoonmaker, where Rush likes targeting in the tight end position. So this week, Cooks, Tolbert, or sits. That's wide receiver start sit every matchup for week 14 of the fantasy football season.